They called him the Devil of Seoul, a man with a block of ice where his heart should be. But today, the most dangerous Korean Mafia boss in the city is on his knees, weeping at the feet of the one person he was supposed to eliminate. Imara's phone beeped at 4:30 p.m., overpowering the silence of the Joon estate. Her heart flipped as the nursing home's name appeared on the screen. Miss Imara, the nurse's voice echoed. The apartment is flooding and we're evacuating everyone, but there is not enough space in the temporary facility. You need to come quickly to get your grandmother now. The phone nearly slipped from Imara's trembling hands. She had nowhere to take her grandmother to. Her apartment is a no-go area because of the rules she must not break. She dressed in her coat and raced through the rain-soaked streets of Seoul. She arrived in no time and saw water seeping through the corridors. Her grandmother, Nana, sat in a wheelchair by the entrance, looking confused and obviously small, clutched her worn leather handbag. Imara knelt beside her and whispered, "We have to go." "Where are we going, dear?" Na's eyes were cloudy, lost in between the present and the past. "Somewhere safe," Imara lied, her stomach twisting within. The drive back to the mansion was silent like a funeral procession. Every light was a moment closer to disaster. Every bend led them closer to a house where third party weren't just unwelcome, they were erased. Seo Joon had earlier made it visibly clear 5 months ago when a lost delivery agent mistakenly rang the service bell. The man was carried away in an ambulance. Imara didn't park in the parking lot, but in the back alley, her hands terribly shaking she could barely turn off the ignition. She helped her grandmother out of the car, supporting her grandmother's fragile frame as they slipped quietly through the service entrance. "Just for today," she murmured to herself like a quiet prayer, "just until I find a way." The air in the mansion was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and fresh gunpowder. Imara stood in the center of the marble hall, her breath hitching as she shielded her grandmother, Nana. She had broken the cardinal rule of the devil, no third party ever. Seo Joon stepped into the light, his black suit torn and his knuckles raw from a nightmare he had just ended. His hand moved toward the cold steel at his waist. Behind him, a dozen bodyguards raised their weapons. Imara, now known only to the underworld as the boss's foreign wife, felt the world tilting. She expected a gunshot. She expected the end of her mafia romance. Instead, the silence was shattered by the sound of expensive fabric hitting the floor. Seo Joon didn't fire. He collapsed. Why would the most ruthless man in Korea risk his empire to kneel before a black woman? And what dangerous obsession from his past is about to put a target on all their backs? The rain didn't just fall. It screamed against the reinforced glass of the mansion, a frantic percussion that masked the sound of Imara's breaking heart. She stood in the service entrance, her frame trembling as she supported the frail weight of her grandmother, Nana. This was the Lion's Den, the ancestral fortress of Seo Joon, the Devil of Seoul, and Imara was about to commit the ultimate betrayal of his trust. Rule number 1 was etched into the very marble of the floors: no strangers ever. "Just a few more steps, Nana," Imara whispered, her voice barely a thread in the dark kitchen. She led the silver-haired woman toward the back servants' quarters, her eyes darting to every shadow. In this mafia boss story, silence was the only currency that bought safety. Every floorboard that groaned felt like a gunshot. Imara's forbidden love for her husband was a complicated knot of devotion and terror. She knew that if Seo Joon found an intruder in his home, his mercy would vanish as quickly as the light of a dying candle. She tucked Nana into a narrow staff bed, the old woman's cloudy eyes searching Imara's face for a recognition that dementia had stolen. Imara pressed a finger to her lips, her chest heaving. The high-stakes romance of her life had always been lived on the edge of a blade, but tonight, the stakes were flesh and blood. She was no longer just a wife. She was a conspirator in a secret affair against the very man who claimed to own her soul. The heavy oak doors of the mansion didn't just open. They surrendered to a force of nature. Seo Joon, the man the underworld whispered of as the Devil of Seoul, swept into the hall like a hurricane made of shadow and expensive wool. The air in the corridor instantly curdled, growing heavy with the metallic tang of rain and the sharp, copper scent of fresh blood. Imara stood paralyzed near the marble pillar, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, the silk lining torn at the shoulder. His white shirt was a canvas of violence, splattered with crimson droplets that told a story of a night spent in the dark corners of the city. He didn't look at her, not at first. He moved with a predatory grace, his knuckles raw, swollen, and stained with the remnants of whatever nightmare he had just walked away from. The silence in the mansion was a physical weight, a hallmark of this mafia boss story where words were often more dangerous than bullets. This was the forbidden love Imara had gambled her life on, a man who maintained a block of ice where a heart should beat. His dangerous obsession with order was absolute, yet here she was, trembling in the center of his fortress while a secret that could destroy them both breathed just a few rooms away. "You're still awake," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that sent a shiver of both dread and desire down her spine. He finally turned, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack diamonds. His eyes, dark and unreadable, raked over her with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. He took a step closer, the distance between them evaporating until she could feel the cold dampness radiating from his clothes. This was the core of their high-stakes romance, the constant pull between his lethal world and the fragile peace she tried to protect. He reached out, his blood-stained fingers hovering just inches from her throat, before he settled them on the wall behind her, effectively pinning her in place. "You're shaking, Imara," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that sent a chill down her spine. "Why is there a scent of lavender in my house that doesn't belong to you?" Imara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "There is a shift in the house tonight, Imara," he whispered, leaning in. His breath was warm, a startling contrast to the icy aura he projected. A sound that shouldn't exist. He was close enough for her to see the flecks of gold in his eyes and the cold, lethal suspicion blooming within them. His fingers tightened against the marble. "Tell me," he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate silkiness. "What are you hiding in my house?" Before she could form a lie, a soft, rhythmic thud echoed from the hallway. The door to the servants' quarters creaked open, and the soft, melodic hum of a grandmother's lullaby drifted into the hall. Seo Joon's eyes narrowed, the ice in them sharpening. "Who is in my house? What happens when the devil finally sees the face of the intruder? Keep watching to find out." The steel at Seo Joon's waist remained untouched. His hand, previously coiled like a viper ready to strike, froze midair as the figure emerged from the shadows of the hallway. Imara held her breath, her soul fracturing as she watched her world of dangerous obsession collide with her hidden past. Nana stepped into the light of the study, her wooden cane tapping a hollow, rhythmic beat against the polished marble. She looked frail, a ghost of a woman in a faded floral dress, her cloudy eyes scanning the room with a confused but regal grace. The guards behind Seo Joon adjusted their aim, the red laser dots dancing across Nana's chest, but the Devil of Seoul didn't give the order to fire yet. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a vacuum that sucked the oxygen from Imara's lungs. She expected a roar of fury. She expected to be cast out for this ultimate betrayal of his mafia boss rules. Instead, she watched a miracle of her destruction. As the proximity alarms blared and the reality of the security breach settled into the marrow of the mansion, the devil in Seo Joon didn't just stand up, he transformed. The vulnerability that had lived with him for years evaporated, replaced by a cold, searing fury that turned the air in the study to dry ice. He didn't look at Nana. He didn't look at the guards. His dangerous obsession with control swung like a scythe toward Imara. He moved across the marble, his stride a predatory blur until he had her backed against the cold stone of the fireplace. He didn't touch her, but his shadow loomed over her like a shroud. "You knew the rule," he hissed, his voice a low, lethal vibration that cut deeper than any blade. "No strangers, no ghosts, no third party. No one enters this fortress without my word." Seo Joon, she was dying in that flood. Imara's voice was a frantic whisper, her heart hammering against her ribs. "And you brought her here." He slammed a hand against the mantel beside her head, the crack of palm against stone echoing like a gunshot. The high-stakes romance they had built was suddenly a battlefield. "You turned my home into a target. You took the one fragment of my soul I had left, the only memory that wasn't soaked in blood, and you put a red laser dot on it." The betrayal in his eyes was more devastating than his anger. In the world of a mafia boss, an emotional debt isn't a gift, it's a vulnerability. By bringing Nana here, Imara hadn't just saved a life. She had handed Seo Joon's enemies the blueprints to his destruction. "I did it for you," she gasped, her breath hitching as his face hovered inches from hers. "I did it so you wouldn't be alone in that ice anymore. You did it because you're selfish," he spat, the words dripping with a cruel, intimate venom. You wanted to play at being a savior in a house built on graves. You broke your oath of loyalty for a woman who doesn't even remember your name. He leaned in closer, his scent, rain, expensive tobacco, and iron, filling her senses. His eyes searched hers, looking for a trace of the woman he thought he knew, but all he found was the terror of a forbidden love that had finally overstepped its bounds. "You aren't my wife tonight, Imara," he whispered, his thumb pressing into the soft skin beneath her jaw with a pressure that was both a caress and a warning. "Tonight, you're just the woman who showed the viper exactly where to strike." Outside, the first explosion rocked the perimeter. The lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Seo Joon pulled away, his face a mask of obsidian. He turned to his lead guard, his voice devoid of all humanity. "Take the old woman to the safe room," he commanded, "and lock the mistress in the north wing. If she tries to leave, treat her like any other intruder." Imara felt the world tilt. "Seo Joon, no." He didn't look back as he checked the magazine of his weapon, the metallic click sounding like the final beat of a dying heart. "You wanted to bring the past into my house, Imara. Now you get to watch while I bury it. The devil has turned his back on the only woman he ever loved. Will Imara find a way to save her grandmother before Seo Joon's fury burns them all? Keep watching." He looked at the old woman as she was being led out of the study and discovered something he never paid attention to earlier. "Imara," he called out. "Who is the old woman to you?" Imara stopped at the entrance and whispered with a trembling voice, "She's my grandmother." The tension in Seo Joon's shoulders didn't just break, it evaporated. The man who ruled the city through fear, the architect of 1,000 secret affairs and blood-soaked deals, began to tremble. A low, ragged sound escaped his throat, a sound that wasn't a growl but a sob. "Your grandmother?" he asked again. "I didn't just bring her here because she's my grandmother, Seo Joon," Imara screamed over the sound of breaking glass, her voice thick with tears. "I brought her here because she's the only reason I'm still alive." She had nowhere to go. The screech of the sirens outside the Seoul mansion faded, replaced by the ghost of a different sound. The rhythmic, metallic rattle of a coin-op dryer in a 1995 Lowe's Angels laundromat. Before he was the Devil of Seoul, he was simply a boy named Joon, 8 years old, rib-thin and bleeding from a split lip. He sat huddled in the corner of a neon-lit 24-hour laundry, his small body trembling as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a swarm of angry hornets. He had been running for 3 days, running from the foster home where discipline meant a belt, and running from the hunger that felt like a living thing clawing at his insides. In this mafia boss story, every legend has a beginning, and Joon began with the scent of lavender and bleach. A pair of worn leather shoes stopped in front of him. Joon flinched, his small hands coming up to shield his face, expecting another blow. But the blow never came. Instead, a warm, calloused hand gently lowered his arms. He looked up to find Nana, 30 years younger, her hair a crown of dark curls, her eyes radiating a powerful protector's warmth. "You look like you've seen a ghost, little one," she murmured. Her voice wasn't filled with the pity Joon hated. It was filled with the kind of authority that demanded honesty. She didn't ask for his name or where his parents were. She saw the dangerous obsession with survival in his eyes and recognized it. Without a word, she reached into her faded handbag and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil and a small carton of milk. "Eat," she commanded softly. "Nobody fights the world on an empty stomach." For the next 3 months, that laundromat became Joon's sanctuary. Nana didn't just feed him. She taught him how to stitch his own clothes, how to stand tall when his legs wanted to give out, and how to hide the pain behind a mask of ice. She was the architect of his resilience. She was the one who told him that a man's worth wasn't in his fists, but in the people he was willing to bleed for. It was a secret affair of the heart, a bond between a woman with nothing and a boy with no one. "Why are you doing this?" Joon had asked her on the final night, just before the social workers finally caught up to him. Nana had tucked a small wooden pendant into his hand, the same one Imara now wore around her neck. "Because one day, Joon, you're going to be a king. And when you are, I want you to remember what it felt like to be a boy who needed a hand." The memory shattered like glass as a bullet tore through the window of the soul study, showering the floor in diamonds. The flashback ended, and Seo Joon was back in the present, his eyes raw with the weight of a 30-year-old debt. He looked at Imara, the granddaughter, the woman who had birthed his soul, and the forbidden love between them took on a terrifying new dimension. He realized now that his high-stakes romance with Imara wasn't an accident. It was destiny coming to collect. Before the eyes of his stunned elite guard, the impossible happened. The rustle of expensive Italian silk hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot. Seo Joon dropped. His knees hit the marble with a sickening, heavy thud. He didn't just sit. He performed a deep 90-degree bow, his forehead nearly touching the feet of the woman Imara had smuggled into his fortress. "Halmoni," he whispered. The word was a jagged glass shard cutting through his composure. "You're alive! You're actually alive!" Imara's heart stopped. This wasn't the reaction of a man discovering an intruder. This was the reaction of a lost soul finding home. The high-stakes romance she thought she understood was instantly rewritten. Tears, hot and unbidden, carved tracks through the dried blood on Seo Joon's face, dripping onto the floor he had spent a lifetime staining with the blood of his enemies. Nana tilted her head, her clouded eyes narrowing as she looked down at the most powerful man in Korea. She reached out a shaky, weathered hand, resting it gently on his dark, meticulously styled hair. "Such a messy boy," she murmured, her voice a soft lullaby in the graveyard of his study. "Why are you crying, little one? Did you forget to eat your vegetables again?" The guards lowered their weapons, their faces masks of pure, unadulterated shock. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. In that moment, the power dynamics of the underworld shifted on its axis. Seo Joon looked up, his eyes bloodshot and raw, locking onto Imara's terrified gaze. The forbidden love between them burned with a new, terrifying light. "You brought her here," he rasped, his voice a mixture of agony and a new, lethal devotion. "You brought back the only person who ever saw me as human." But the moment of peace was shattered by the frantic chirping of a radio on a guard's belt. "Boss, we have movement on the perimeter. The Viper's men, they saw the light. They're coming for the weakness." Seo Joon stood up, the vulnerability vanishing as the devil returned, deadlier than ever. He grabbed Imara by the waist, pulling her flush against his chest, his eyes burning with a dangerous obsession. "They think you're my weakness, Imara," he hissed, his lips brushing her ear as the sound of tires screeched outside. "They're about to find out you're the only reason I haven't burned this city to the ground." He turned toward the window, his silhouette framed by the flickering orange glow of the fires outside. He checked the magazine of his pistol, his face settling into a mask of pure, unadulterated lethal intent. "They came for my weakness," he whispered, the devil returning with a vengeance. "But they don't realize. They just gave me something to die for. The war has just reached his doorstep. Will Seo Joon sacrifice his empire to protect the woman who saved him? The Viper's men have breached the inner courtyard. Seo Joon is outnumbered 10-1. Will the debt he owes Nana be paid in blood tonight? The gunshots outside had ceased, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like the mansion itself was holding its breath. In the center of the debris-strewn study, Seo Joon stood tall, his silhouette a jagged blade against the flickering emergency lights. The devil had returned from the brink, but he was no longer the man his men recognized. His lead lieutenant, Sang-woo, stepped forward, his tactical gear slick with the rain of the assault. He gestured toward the safe room where Nana sat, oblivious to the carnage, humming a tune from a lifetime ago. "Boss, the perimeter is clear, but the old woman, she's a liability. She nearly cost us the North Gate. We should move her to a secondary site. Alone." The air in the room didn't just chill, it froze. Seo Joon turned, his movements slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. He didn't use his weapon. Instead, he crossed the space between them in 2 predatory strides, grabbing Sang-woo by the tactical vest and slamming him against the blood-splattered marble pillar. The sound was a sickening thud that echoed into the rafters. "Liability." Seo Joon's voice was a low, lethal silkiness that made the other guards recoil. He leaned in, his eyes burning with a dangerous obsession that had shifted from power to protection. "You are speaking about the woman who birthed my soul. You are speaking about my wife's grandmother, the only woman keeping me alive." Imara watched from the shadows, her breath hitching. This was the high-stakes romance she had feared, a man who loved with the same violence he used to kill. The power imbalance had shifted. He wasn't just her husband or her captor anymore. He was the guardian of her bloodline. "Listen to me and listen well," Seo Joon whispered, his gaze raking over the assembled men. "There is a new rule in this house. This woman, this Halmoni, is to be treated with the same reverence as a queen. If she wants to walk the gardens at midnight, you will light her path. If she forgets where she is, you will guide her home with your heads bowed." Seo Joon straightened his cuffs, the white fabric stained with the history of his mafia romance. If any of you so much as breathes a word of disrespect or looks at her with anything less than total submission, Seo Joon continued, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft register, I won't just fire you, I will erase you. Do I make myself clear? Chorus of yes, boss, rippled through the room, punctuated by the sound of boots clicking together in fearful salute. Seo Joon turned back to Imara. The fury in his eyes softened into something even more dangerous, undiluted, forbidden love. He walked toward her, his hand reaching out to brush a stray curl from her forehead. His touch was electric, a silent promise of the secret affairs and blood debts yet to be paid. She stays, he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her lower lip. And you stay. This isn't a fortress anymore, Imara. It's a sanctuary, and I will burn the world down to keep it that way. But as he pulled her into the heat of his chest, his personal phone vibrated. A private message flashed on the screen, a grainy photo of Imara entering a law office weeks ago. Does the king know his queen was planning to leave him before the grandmother arrived? Seo Joon's grip on her waist tightened, just a fraction too much. The ice was back in his eyes. The secrets are beginning to bleed into the light. Will Seo Joon's new devotion turn into a deadly cage? The shadows in the Seoul underworld didn't just hide secrets, they whispered them. Miles away from the fortified sanctuary of the mansion, in a dimly lit room that smelled of stale smoke and high-end electronics, a different kind of dangerous obsession was taking shape. Lee Sang-woo, known to the streets as the Viper, leaned into the blue glow of a dozen monitors. His eyes, cold and calculating, didn't flicker as he scrolled through high-resolution surveillance photos. These weren't images of drug shipments or rival territory. They were intimate. Grainy shots of a silver-haired woman, a photo of a Korean Mafia boss, a man who had never bowed to any king, holding a frail, weathered hand with a tenderness that looked like a fatal wound. So, the devil has a heart after all, the Viper whispered, his voice a dry rasp that filled the small room. And it belongs to a ghost from the past. This was the ultimate pivot in their high-stakes romance. To the underworld, a weakness isn't a vulnerability to be pitied. It is a target to be exploited. The Viper pulled up a final image, Imara standing by a window, her expression a mix of forbidden love and paralyzing fear. He tapped the screen over her face with a jagged fingernail. The black wife was the bait, he murmured to the silent men standing behind him. But the grandmother. She is the kill switch. If we take her, we don't just take his territory. We take his soul. Back at the mansion, the air felt deceptively still. Imara stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she prepared a tray of tea. Every time the wind rattled the window pane, she flinched, feeling the weight of the devil's new rules pressing against her chest. Seo Joon's transition from ruthless leader to a fierce, almost suffocating protector had created a new kind of tension. Their mafia romance had shifted into a territory where every kiss felt like a goodbye, and every shadow looked like an assassin. She didn't see the tiny, red light of a long-range camera lens reflecting off the silver tea service. She didn't feel the eyes in the dark tracking her every move from the tree line beyond the reinforced gates. She looks like she's waiting for something. A voice crackled through a headset in the Viper's den. She is, the Viper replied, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. She's waiting for the end of her world. Give the order. We don't go for the gates this time. We go for the one thing he thinks is safe. Suddenly, the power in the mansion groaned. The obsidian chandeliers flickered once, twice, and then plunged the hall into a suffocating, absolute blackness. In the silence, the sound of a window shattering in the north wing echoed like a scream. Imara dropped the tray, the porcelain shattering against the marble, but she didn't cry out. Her voice was trapped in her throat as a heavy, gloved hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Don't make a sound, little bird, a voice hissed into her ear, or the old woman dies before the boss even finds his gun. The Viper has struck at the heart of the fortress. With the lights out and the devil trapped in his own office, who will reach Nana first? The darkness in the mansion wasn't empty. It was alive with the sound of breaking glass and the synchronized thrum of suppressed gunfire. The devil's fortress had become a tomb. Inside the pitch-black kitchen, Imara felt the cold steel of a knife pressed against her throat. The gloved hand over her mouth smelled of gunpowder and rain, the signature of the Viper's men. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone, as she heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots moving toward the safe room where Nana sat. This was the terrifying reality of her mafia romance. The price of love was often paid in blood. "Find the old woman," a voice hissed through the dark. "The boss wants his leverage." Suddenly, the darkness was shattered by a blinding, white-hot flash. A flashbang detonated in the hallway, followed by a roar that didn't sound human. Seo Joon hadn't just arrived. He had unleashed the monster he usually kept chained behind his expensive silk ties. The man holding Imara didn't have time to scream. A single shot rang out, precise and lethal, and the weight against her back vanished as her captor slumped to the marble. Imara scrambled away, her hands finding the slick, cold floor until a pair of strong, familiar arms hauled her upright. Even in the chaos, his touch was electric. Seo Joon pulled her flush against his chest, his breathing ragged, his heart thumping a violent staccato against her own. His white shirt was soaked, his dangerous obsession with her safety manifesting as a physical shield. "Stay behind me," he rasped, his voice a low, guttural command. "Do not move until I tell you the world is dead." This was the peak of their high-stakes romance, standing in the center of a battlefield, surrounded by enemies, yet feeling an intimacy so sharp it hurt. He checked the corner, his movements a blur of lethal grace. He was a king defending his crown, but as they reached the door to the safe room, he froze. The door was swinging open. 3 of the Viper's elite stood over Nana. The old woman looked up, her cloudy eyes blinking at the laser sights painting a crimson map across her chest. She wasn't screaming. She was smiling, reaching out a hand as if to offer a piece of fruit to a monster. "Look at you all," Nana murmured into the tense silence. "So much noise for such small boys." The lead gunman leveled his weapon at Nana's temple. He didn't look at the grandmother, he looked at Seo Joon. "Drop the gun, devil, or watch the only woman you ever loved die for a second time." Seo Joon's fingers tightened on his weapon, his knuckles white. The power imbalance had never been more devastating. He was the most powerful man in Seoul, but at that moment he was just a boy in a laundromat again, watching his world catch fire. "Seo Joon, don't," Imara whispered, her hand gripping his blood-stained sleeve. He didn't drop the gun. Instead, he took a step forward, the muzzle of his pistol aimed directly at the gunman's head, his eyes burning with a forbidden love that had turned into a suicide pact. "You think she's my weakness," Seo Joon whispered, a terrifying, jagged smile splitting his face. "She's the one who taught me how to kill people like you." From the shadows behind the gunman, a small, silver flash glinted. Nana's hand, weathered and shaky, suddenly moved with the precision of a cobra, a sharpened knitting needle she'd hidden in her sleeve diving into the lead gunman's thigh. As the man screamed, Seo Joon lunged. The siege has turned into a bloodbath, but as the smoke clears, a hidden sniper's red dot settles on the one person Seo Joon forgot to protect. The safe room was no longer a sanctuary. It was a glass-walled cage, and the air within it tasted of ozone and impending death. As Seo Joon lunged toward the lead gunman, a second figure materialized from the smoke behind the shattered French doors. A sniper, his movements clinical and cold, leveled a silenced rifle at Seo Joon's exposed flank. "Joon, move!" Nana's voice didn't crack. It rang out with the authority of the woman who had once commanded the streets of Lo's Angels. But Seo Joon was mid-strike, his dangerous obsession with neutralizing the immediate threat blinding him to the shadow in the corner. Imara screamed, her hand outstretched, but she was too far. The world slowed into a terrifying cinematic crawl. The sniper's finger tightened on the trigger. The red laser dot climbed from Seo Joon's shoulder toward the base of his skull. Then the impossible happened. Nana, the woman who had struggled to walk to the garden just hours ago, threw her wooden cane aside. With a burst of strength that defied her 78 years, she stepped into the line of fire. She didn't flinch. She didn't look at the gun. She looked at Seo Joon, her messy boy, with a gaze of absolute, unwavering loyalty. The muffled thud of the suppressed rifle was the loudest sound Imara had ever heard. Nana's body jerked, a small, dark bloom appearing on the shoulder of her faded floral dress. She stumbled, not into the arms of the enemy, but forward, her hand reaching out to steady herself against Seo Joon's back. The Devil of Seoul froze. The man he had been strangling fell to the floor, forgotten. Seo Joon turned, his face a mask of such raw, agonizing horror that it transcended any mafia romance trope. He caught Nana as she collapsed, his large, blood-stained hands trembling as they cradled her frail frame. "Halmoni!" "No, no, no, no," he rasped, the words breaking in his throat. He lowered her to the marble, his body shielded her from any further harm, his eyes searching hers for a spark of life. Nana coughed, a thin trail of crimson staining her lips, but she managed a weak, defiant smile. She reached up, her fingers fluttering against the sharp line of his jaw. "I told you! You were an idiot, June, always forgetting to look behind you." Imara dropped to her knees beside them, her tears hitting Nana's hand. This was the ultimate high-stakes romance, a grandmother paying the debt of a king with her own life. The silence that followed was shattered by Seo Joon's head snapping toward the sniper. The sniper didn't get a second shot. Seo Joon's hand moved in a blur of lethal instinct, his own weapon barking twice. The intruder fell, but the victory felt like ashes. Seo Joon looked back down at Nana, his forehead resting against hers. The power imbalance was gone. The boss was gone. There was only a broken boy and the woman who had saved him twice. "Don't leave me," he whispered, a tear finally falling onto Nana's cheek. "I just got you back." Nana's eyes began to flutter shut, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Take care of." "My girl," she whispered, her gaze drifting to Imara. "And June, eat your vegetables." Her hand fell limp. Seo Joon didn't scream. He didn't roar. He sat in the center of the carnage, cradling the woman who had birthed his soul, his eyes turning into two black pits of infinite, cold vacuum. He looked at Imara, and for the first time she was terrified, not of his enemies, but of the man he was about to become. "The Viper didn't just kill a woman," Seo Joon whispered, his voice a flat, dead line. "He just burned down the only bridge I had to the light." In the distance, the sound of a helicopter approached. It wasn't the police. It was the Viper coming to finish the job. The devil is unleashed. But as Seo Joon prepares for a one-man war, he realizes the Viper has one final, devastating secret about Imara's past. The silence that followed the war was not the hollow quiet of a graveyard, but the simmering heat of a home being rebuilt. In the master suite of the mansion, a room once defined by cold shadows and lethal secrets, the Devil of Seoul sat motionless. Seo Joon, a man whose name usually commanded the silence of 1,000 soldiers, was currently being brought to his knees by nothing more than a wooden spoon and a sharp look. Nana sat on the edge of the velvet armchair, her shoulder bandaged, her regal poise unshaken by the bullet that had tried to claim her. She held a bowl of steaming porridge, the aroma of toasted sesame and rice cutting through the lingering scent of gunpowder. "Eat," she commanded, her voice as firm as it had been in that LA laundromat 30 years ago. "You're pale, June. You look like a ghost that forgot how to haunt." Seo Joon, his arm in a sling and his face a map of healing bruises, didn't argue. The most feared man in the underworld reached out with his good hand, his fingers stained with the history of a mafia boss story he was finally trying to close. He took a bite, the warmth blooming in his chest, melting the last of the ice. Imara stood her heart aching with a mixture of relief and a dangerous obsession with this new, fragile piece. She watched the power imbalance tilt on its axis once again. The king was being scolded like a child, and for the first time in their high-stakes romance, he looked truly free. "She's right, you know," Imara murmured, stepping into the light. She walked to his side, her hand resting tentatively on his shoulder. "You can't protect us if you're starving." Seo Joon looked up at her, his dark eyes softening into a gaze of forbidden love so intense it felt like a vow. He pulled her closer, burying his face against her waist for a brief, heavy second. "I'm not running anymore," he whispered. "No more secret affairs with the shadows. From today, this house belongs to the three of us." Nana huffed, tapping her spoon against the bowl. "Don't get sentimental, boy. Sentiment doesn't fix the roof or keep the Viper's cousins from knocking. You be a man, you be the king she deserves." Seo Joon straightened, the devil returning for one final, righteous decree. He looked at Imara, then at Nana. "The Viper is gone. His empire is ash, but our story is just beginning." He leaned in, his lips brushing Imara's ear in a promise that tasted of salt and silver. "I'll give you the world, Imara, but you'll have to help me rule it." As the sun began to break over the Seoul skyline, the three of them sat in the quiet strength of a chosen family. The debt was paid. The bow was finished. And the man who never knelt for anyone finally found a reason to stand and to live again. True power isn't in the bullets you fire or in how many people fear you, but in the people you are willing to bow to. Seo Joon found his soul in the heart of a grandmother and the love of a wife. Dear viewers, never underestimate a small act of kindness. It may be the very thing that will save your life many years later. What will you do for the ones you love? Share your thoughts below and stay legendary.